Hi, welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in March. So I completed a total of 10 books, which is funny because I was feeling like I didn't finish that many books, but 10 books sounds like a decent amount. But my page count number, I think, was down from previous months because a lot of the books that I completed were middle grade. I think I have 5 middle grade on this list, and I also have a manga. And then I have like a very short nonfiction and a very short classic. So a lot of the books that I have on here are shorter. So a lot of my page count for this month came from me reading the first half of Anathem by Neil Stephenson, which I am still working on and will finish sometime in April, as well as I read over half of Adam Bede in March as well, but I didn't finish it until I was a few days into April. So that'll go in April's wrap up. Anyways, I'll have this divided into sections. That way you can skip around. I'll have them divided up into genres and you can listen to what you want to and skip the things maybe you're not so interested in. We'll start with my biggest category, which is middle grade, because it was middle grade March. And most of the books that I'm going to talk about here, I did actually already talk about in depth in a vlog that I did recently, where I read all of the Newbery nominees and then ranked them and told you what my favorites were out of all of them. So I read 4 of the 5 during March. I read 1 of them in February. So I will keep my thoughts brief because you can just head over there and hear my more in-depth thoughts. The first one that I finished was Magnolia Wu Unfolds It All, which is a story of a young girl whose parents own a laundromat in New York City, and she has kept all these socks that have been left behind, and her and a friend go on an adventure to find out where these socks belong. I loved this book. I thought it was funny. I thought it was quirky. I thought it had a lot of heart, a lot of things about friendship, found family, and it felt like all these things blended together really well and didn't feel like it was trying too hard. And it was just like such a beautiful beautiful book. I enjoyed it so much, and I immediately passed it on to my daughter, who loved it probably even more than I did. The next one that I finished, I did entirely on audio, and that is One Big Open Sky by Lisa Klein Ransom. This is the same author as Finding Langston, which is a great free verse poetry novel that I read a few years ago about a Black boy during the Great Migration, and this is kind of a migration story of sorts also, as it follows a family of Black pioneers, which I didn't even know was a thing. So very shortly after the Reconstruction, there was a point where Black people were able to move west and become settlers and purchase land out there where they were not able to purchase land where they were currently living. So our main protagonist, her father has a dream to go west to Nebraska, and they decide they're going to travel that way, and we're following her family. We end up with 3 viewpoints: the girl's viewpoint, the mother's viewpoint, and then another woman that they pick up along the way who's agreed to be a school teacher in Nebraska. I liked some of the characters in this and thought overall like it was an important story to tell of an area of history that not very many people talk about. So for that reason, I did like it. But I also thought that there are elements to it that were a bit off-putting for me, and honestly, the format of it would have driven me crazy if I read it physically because there's 0 punctuation. And I'm kind of a snob about punctuation stuff, I guess. So I enjoyed it on audio, but it still didn't like wow me like some of the other contenders did. The winner of the Newbery was The First State of Being by Aaron Estrada Kelly, and this is a story of a young boy named Michael who's living in 1999, and he's really concerned about Y2K, the impending doom, and he's trying to prepare and do things. His mom is a single mom who works multiple jobs, so he feels like she doesn't have time to worry about it, so he's trying to do all that he can for it. Suddenly, he encounters a boy who's acting strangely and looks strange, and he finds out that this boy lives 200 years in the future and has time traveled backwards. This story was okay for me. I felt like it had some redeeming elements, particularly kind of like all the people who live in this apartment complex together and how tightly knit they are, and also the message of living for today, not being consumed with worry and anxiety for the future. So there were things about it that I felt like it did really well, but there were things about it that I really didn't like, and overall it just kind of felt meh to me. It felt okay. Wasn't bad. It was kind of like middle of the pack. My least favorite book was the one that I was the most excited to read, and that's The Wrong Way Home. This is a story about a young girl and her mother who are escaping a cult. And if you know me, you know that I love a good cult book. And this is not a good cult book, unfortunately. It was okay. So the young girl is definitely very still entrenched in the cult mindset for most of the book. It's the mother that leaves. And it's really weird because it doesn't really follow a lot of the things that you would expect from a cult, especially the fact that we don't spend very much time with a cult in the beginning. So it takes a while for you to figure out that this is in fact not a religious cult, but it's an environmental cult. And a lot of the things that our main character is entrenched in and believes are actually praised and lauded by all of the adults in her life and quite a few of the kids that she meets as well. So it's kind of this strange thing, and I feel like the author was maybe trying to do a nuanced thing with it, but it just came off as feeling like incredibly inconsistent, and then the end ended up being like very over the top dramatic in a way that is so unrealistic for a cult. So it was just really, it's one of those things where if you know anything about cults, and it's not like I have experience with a cult, but I was actually talking with a friend who does have some experience with this, and she was talking about how unrealistic it was. And it also feels like really odd when compared to other books about cults. I was really disappointed by it, unfortunately. The last middle grade book that I read had nothing to do with the Newbery. And that's Then There Were Five by Elizabeth Enright. This is book 3 of the Melindy Quartet, about a family with 4 children and their adventures. Each book kind of follows a different thing that they're going on, and I just love it. I feel like it's such a heartwarming story, but in the same respect, there's humor. There's just a lot of beautiful writing. Like, Elizabeth Enright has a really strong sense of place, and so this takes place over the course of a summer in the countryside in New York, and it is just gorgeously written, and it feels like a taste of summer. Like, it's so wonderful. And I love it so much. I love it just as much as the first 2 books in the series, and I only have 1 more left to go. So I'm really enjoying it. I read it with my daughter, and we read it together with Christy Lewis from Dostoevsky in Space, which was really fun because we were able to get together and talk about what we loved about it. Moving on to nonfiction, you probably saw that I hosted a nonfiction read-along on my channel during the month of March for E.M. Bound's Power Through Prayer. We did weekly live shows, which are still on my channel. So if you read this book and weren't able to come to the live shows, or you want to read this book and then listen to our thoughts, feel free to go back and check those out. When I chose this book, I didn't realize how focused this book was going to be on pastors, specifically the aspect of preaching. There was a lot of wisdom for me to glean from the pages, especially being someone who is very actively involved in ministry. My husband is a pastor, for those of you who might not know. And so there were elements that were really relevant to me, or would be really relevant to my husband. So I did appreciate that. However, I definitely felt like I was not the intended audience for this book, and that I felt that throughout, although there was wisdom to glean, I think, for any believer from a lot of things that he was talking about, especially when he talked about making time for and prioritizing prayer, and how if we're focused on ministries, or we're focused on the Word of God and we don't have the element of prayer and we don't have the Holy Spirit, we're going to be very imbalanced. And I thought that that was really wonderful. So there's a lot of good things that I gleaned about this, but I kind of wish I had chosen a different E.M. Bounds book. This is going to be a real brief section. I did read a manga. I read Attack on Titan Volume 15. It's been a while since I read Volume 14, so I kind of had to reacclimate and get my bearings. But I do feel like so far, this series is kind of petering out for me a little bit. And I think the series has 30-something volumes. And so we're on Volume 15. I'm reading it with Christy. And while I often enjoy them while I'm reading them, I don't really think about them as much afterwards. And we haven't seen a Titan in several volumes. And so it's very much about the political underpinnings and things that are happening. And I love political stuff. And Volume 14 was entirely political. And I really liked that one. But Volume 15 felt like we were just rehashing a lot of the same discussions and bringing up things that we didn't know about, that we've been asking questions about since Volume 1. And so I feel like we're just having more questions introduced, and we haven't really had any questions answered for the last couple of volumes. So yeah, I felt like it was okay. I read one historical fiction during the month of March, and I read it for my in-person book club. That's The Women by Kristen Hanna. I have a very unpopular opinion on this book, so if you loved this book, I'm very, very glad for you. This was many people's favorite book of the year in 2024. So I have a very unpopular opinion because I struggled with this book on so many levels. I don't want to get too much into the nitty-gritty details because I don't want to be spoilery. But this is a story about a young girl who ends up going to Vietnam as a nurse. So the first half of the book details her experiences in Vietnam. The second half of the book is her being home from Vietnam, her experience post-war as a veteran, the PTSD that she's struggling with, all of those kinds of things. There are things that this book did so well. I felt the visceral horror in Vietnam as she's in these hospitals and men are coming in with like their legs blown off, and like it is so, like, it's very descriptive, and that would be off-putting to some, I think, because it is quite gruesome, but like you feel the horror of dealing with this day after day after day after day, which is what they experienced. And so I felt like that element was so well done. I also thought when she came home from Vietnam, you know, we know that people really mistreated Vietnam vets. And so she's no exception to that rule. But in addition to that, when she tries to find help or she tries to talk to people about it, there was a conversation circulating at the time about there are no women in Vietnam. There were no women in Vietnam. And so people don't believe her when she says that she was there, or if they do believe her because she's a nurse and she wasn't in combat, they act like that didn't count and that there's no trauma or anything from that. And so that was a really interesting facet, along with, I felt like her PTSD and then subsequent addiction issues were handled really well as well. So this is a story that I feel like is an important story, but I wish someone other than Kristen Hanna had told it, because there is so much that she does here that I'm just like, what are you even doing? Like, the story is The Women, but we are focused on our main character for the entire book, which, I mean, she is the main character, so that's fine. But she has these other women who are friends with her and are nurses with her in Vietnam, and then they keep in touch and even live together at certain points after they come home from the war. And they are so glossed over. Their only purpose in this book is to help support her through her hard times. In fact, one of them, it actually talks about some of the hard things that are happening in her family, and our main character does nothing to support her, just writes her a letter that says, oh my gosh, that's awful, but then expects her to drop everything to help her. And like, it's like, I felt like these friends were just cardboard cutouts. Instead, we're very much focused on the main character's romantic relationships, most of which contain adultery. And so I'm like, this is just like, it was not a great reading experience. I'll just tell you that much. I really didn't like most of this book, and I really struggled with it in so many ways. I could say a lot more about it, but again, I don't want to be spoilery, and I also don't want to crap all over someone's favorite book because I know so many people loved this book, and I'm so glad that it worked better for other people than it did for me. But I found myself wishing I had just read the memoir that Kristen Hanna read to prepare for this book, because I think I would have liked it so much more than I liked the book. Lastly, I had two classics that I read this month. One was a reread and one was not. The one that was a reread was Anne of Avonlea. I read this with Stephanie. We are rereading through the Anne of Green Gables books together, so this is book 2. I flew through this book because I was really like struggling reading a lot of heavier books like The Women and some others. And Anne of Avonlea is just like a familiar book for me, but it's also like a breath of fresh air with so much joy and so much optimism during a time that I was incredibly stressed out. And Anne of Avonlea was just like so comforting. So it was such a joy to read this. This mostly follows Anne and her teaching experience in Avonlea. I just love it. It's actually my daughter's favorite in the entire series because she loves Davy. He's just so much fun. And if you watch the Anne of Green Gable movies with Megan Follows, Davy's not included, which is a crying shame because he is a wonderful character. So if you've watched the movies and you've not read the books, you are doing yourself a great disservice and you're missing out on a lot of great stuff. I also read The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. not to be confused with Invisible Man by Ralph Ellis. I found out when I was, Googling stuff about Invisible Man, like doing research for my notes and stuff. I kept like getting things mixed up with the Ralph Ellison book. So this is a different book. This is a sci-fi novella written about, you guessed it, an invisible man. This was actually the only book that I had for my British literature class that I was teaching that I had not previously read. So it was really fun to read this one. It was not what I was expecting at all, because I was expecting something that felt like much more sci-fi. This does have sci-fi elements to it. There's experimentation. You find out how he became invisible, what's going on with that, like how he's trying to become visible again. You get his backstory. You get like there is sciencey stuff. But then like the last section of the book, like there's a tonal shift where it feels very funny and over the top in the beginning, and then it shifts to a much darker feeling narrative. And the shift is really interesting, but the plot itself is also very interesting and takes turns that I did not expect. So it was a great reading experience, and I really, really enjoyed discussing it with my class. Well, those are the books that I read in the month of March. It's really interesting because I look back on this list and there are a lot of books that I felt really mediocre or didn't enjoy as much. And I was still very much heavily in a reading slump for most of March. And I feel like now I'm starting to come out of it a little bit. But it's funny because I'm like, March wasn't that slumpy because I didn't end on a slump as much. But then I look at this and I'm like, oh yeah, I struggled with a lot of these books. So I didn't have like the most positive reviews this month. So hopefully April will be better now that I'm kind of starting to come out of my funk a little bit and read some things that are more enjoyable to me a little bit more recently. At least that's how it is at the beginning of April. I hope it'll be that way at the end. I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. Have you read any of these books? If so, I would love to hear your thoughts. And also let me know what you've been reading. What was your favorite book that you read in the month of March? Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me. And I will see you again next time.